Yesterday marked 11 years since Michael Brown's death. In the cruel August heat in the neighborhood of Ferguson, Missouri, his body was left in the uncompromising street by law enforcement officers for 4.5 hours after they murdered him. Although I can't entirely remember where I was at the time, I do remember my actions that day. I was somewhere in Miami, glued to my phone on Twitter, both trying to figure out what was happening on the ground in Ferguson while directing other people in other places on how to possibly respond. I barely slept. Not only had the uprising sparked to a level that I had never witnessed before in my life, Twitter finally allowed for the trending of a name of someone killed by police violence, which connected outrage from corners of society to come together in ways that we had never before. Dr. Robin D.G. Kelley has pointed out before that the ability to have Michael Brown's name trend on Twitter was actually as a way for the state to take us away from us having witnessed the devastation and bombing of Gaza at that time, because never before Mike Brown had someone who had been killed by the police was their name allowed to trend. But instead of confusing and dividing our attention, many of us began to see the parallel of violence in Palestine under the occupation of US-backed Israel, and the violence that we were witnessing in our own towns and cities across this nation of people being brutalized directly and indirectly by the US state. And tomorrow will mark 60 years since the uprising in Watts, California, that was sparked by a similar stop by law enforcement. And although it did not kill the young teenagers who had been harassed by the police, it seeded a movement of flowering possibility with those who were discontented by the compromises and slow victories that had not yet spread of the civil rights movement. I was reading this afternoon, I've shared with many of you all, I've been reading Black Liturgies by Cole Arthur Riley. And for today, I was torn between picking up the chapter of rage or of lament. And I say this because a friend of mine once pointed out, I was telling them how I had all my life had to deal with feelings of anger, intense body wrecking anger, that sometimes I didn't know what to do with it. And a friend of mine a few years ago suggested that maybe it wasn't so much anger and rage I was feeling all the time, but of sadness and a deep despair that I wasn't comfortable with dealing with. And who could be? We don't live in a society that allows for sadness. But rage, anger is an emotion, perhaps because it's more masculine or aggressive emotion that is more widely accepted in our society. And because of that conversation, instead of going to the chapter on rage, I actually went to the chapter of lament today. And it started out with this quote by Jamaica Kincaid. You cry when you're born because your lungs expand. You breathe. I think that's really kind of significant. You come into the world crying, and it's a sign that you're alive. During the movement for Black Lives convening in commemoration of the movement a few weeks ago, we were able to spend time with loved ones of those who had been slain by the state, whether directly or indirectly. And throughout conversations, and there was a huge panel with folks whose loved ones who had been taken by police, they kept saying this African proverb over and over, woven throughout their comments, that there are two deaths. One death that happens when your body passes away, and the other that occurs when people stop saying your name. And so many of the family members had two requests leaving that space. Of course, the first was to continue struggling and fighting for justice, not that just of those who are taken, but also those who are still here and those who are yet to become. And they asked us to never stop saying the names of their loved ones. At that same convening, I was able to have a conversation with Mama Gwen Carr, who is the mother of Eric Garner. And although Mama Carr and I have met many times before, I was able to actually have a real one-on-one intimate conversation with her. And I know I've shared this before on Freedom Church of the Poor, that Eric Garner's death to me was life-changing in so many ways. Whether you call it a political or spiritual awakening or a mental breakdown, it was life-changing. And I was down bad. I remember being in the bed for weeks after his murder. And there was something about the way that Mama Carr and Eric Garner's daughter at the time, Erica Garner, continued to put themselves out there in the streets, calling for justice for not only Eric Garner, but for all those whose life were taken. It inspired me to the core. And I carry Erica Garner's name in my prayers because she ultimately died of a broken heart at the tender age of 35 years old by heart attack. I want to lift up the names of Erica and the names of all the women, known and unknown, whose hearts have yet to mend. To pray for all the little girls whose girlhood is taken, mistaken, and denied. Mothers of the slain, Zippa, Mamie Till, Leslie McSpaden. Mothers of the Revolution, Mary, Mother of Jesus, Marsha P. Johnson, Erica Garner. Our sisters in the wilderness, and not just sisters of dissent, of lament, wailing for justice, struggling for a new world to begin. Femmes in the margins, stretching and growing us to come together. We say the names of those who we know and honor the memories of those we don't through our works.